Dutton at his best can, if he practices, he can sort of sound a little bit positive or nice for a little while. It's conceivable they'll be able to get him in some ads and get 43 takes, and one of them he looks friendly and positive. Yeah, that's...
Welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic. John Armitage is back and he's brought all his hot takes with him. The Albanese Labor government has been competent, quietly productive and scandal-free. But without a solid campaign narrative, that just might cost them the federal election. So, how do we turn this close race into a solid victory for Labor? Listen in and find out after a word from our sponsors. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well. And you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month. And you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift. So if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years. They believe the law should serve everyone and not just those that can afford it. So for empathetic and expert legal support, call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday, a hot Wednesday afternoon in Melbourne. I am over summer. I need it to end right now. I'm sick of these hot days and hot nights. My Celtic genes were not built for this weather. But anyway, we're joined on the line by a good friend of mine. He's a social and political researcher for Kudos Research. He was on the show a couple of weeks ago. John Armitage, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thanks, Stephen. Great to be here, mate.
It looks like with that red brick there that you're coming to us live from New York's Comedy Cellar.
Yes, that's right. It's a very sophisticated office setup I've got here now that I'm back in the big smoke. Yeah.
Wonderful. When you were on the show the last time, our intention was to talk about federal politics and in particular campaign messages and narrative of the two major parties. But it happened to be, we were recording the show just after the Werribee by-election, and I asked you a couple of questions about the Werribee by-election. That turned into a complete episode, so we didn't even get to the federal topics of discussion. So today we will endeavour to do that. However, once again, I've managed to schedule a recording with you just after the Western Australian election. So I do want to ask you a couple of questions about the WA election, just whilst it's fresh in our minds, but I am still committed to us talking about federal politics as well. But just to recount for those that haven't been paying attention, the Western Australian election was held on Saturday just gone. Labor was returned once again for their third term in a row. They picked up 41 seats. At this stage anyway, there's 65% of the vote counted. Labor picked up 41 seats, the Libs 5, the Nats 4. There are 9 seats in doubt. There was a primary swing of 18.3% against Labor, and so their primary is at 41.7, and they lost 4 seats. The Liberals picked up 7.1% swing to them on their primary, so their primary is now 28.4. They picked up 3 seats. Up from 2 from the last election. The Nationals had a swing of 1.5. They picked up an additional seat and their primaries at 5.6. The Greens had a swing of about 3.5%. Didn't pick up any seats, 10% primary, and 2 and a bit points to One Nation, up to 3.5, giving Labor a 57.6% two-party preferred over the Tories, 40, Lib Nats 42.4. A resounding victory, John Armitage. Like that was an ass kicking, and to do it going into their third term was quite significant.
Yeah, and you started off there. It sounds like a huge swing against Labor on the primary. Keep in mind, their primary last time was 60 and the 2PP was ever so close to 70. It was an astonishing win, sort of post-pandemic Mark McGowan Premier, sort of astonishing result. even if you thought of this as some sort of a correction, it's a correction back to a really, really big win. And that might have been a factor there, I suspect. The Liberal Party was reduced to 2 seats. I think the Nationals were 4. They might have swapped one or something, but astonishing. I was just completely wiped out. I was doing some, way back when, some focus groups, and we kept on shifting who we were going to recruit to end up. We're recruiting conservative Liberal voters, lifetime Liberal voters, and they're still voting for McGowan. So an astonishingly good result. Whether that was partly related to just the huge majority to start with and the resources, I don't know. But I think to segue to federal, it's always a bit risky, I think, to make assumptions about any link between state and federal. Are often for different things. WA is a genuinely distinct electorate, genuinely separate, more so than Queensland, I think. Not as in they're disconnected from the rest of the country, but just the sense of identity is, and the physical distance is so great. So I wouldn't draw too much in it, but at the same time, I think it's a very good thing for the Labor Party nationally, because if your brand can get that very high, what did you say, 57 or something, then clearly, and part of the reason we were able to get up last time was the big swing in WA, which Federal Labor had been a long way behind for a long time. I remember looking for a few years in a row there. It seemed like out of the 11, we were lucky to get 2 or 3. So it was in really important seats, and hopefully that gives us a boost in those 2 or 3 that might be potentially at risk at this election.
It also, I was over there for election day. Went over to do the good campaign tourist that I am, and hand out for a good friend of mine, Lorna Clark, who was running for the seat of Butler, up in the northern suburbs of Perth, and she got up, which is great. Congratulations, Lorna. All down to my efforts at a very, very quiet booth in Yanchep. But 2 reflections that I took from it was the transition from the premiership of Mark McGowan to Roger Cook was relatively seamless, in that it was kind of new guy but same strong narrative. And the second reflection was the narrative was very WA focused, in that they were talking about, we're going to keep fighting for the GST funding that we're stealing off of Victoria and New South Wales, whilst we're digging up a lot of our natural resources and selling that and creating jobs, and we're going to protect Western Australian jobs, and we're going to start to build more things here. So it was a really kind of parochial Western Australian type campaign. Voters agreed with that frame that they put to them. Mark McGowan handed over to Roger Cook with enough time for Roger Cook to build up a relationship with the electorate, and to start to just zero in a Glenn McGrath, bowling down that corridor of uncertainty, sort of delivery after like a metronome, just being constantly focused on those core messages for the entire time he was leading up to that campaign. And it came through in spades, and that's why I think one of the reasons why they had such a successful result on Saturday night.
And again, this might turn out to be a segue to federal as well, but I think that sticking to a message, that having a story, understanding what your narrative was for Labor in WA, and I do also think a lack of that from the opposition. It is in the end, it ends up being a sort of 2-horse race, elections, if your opponents haven't got a clear narrative and you do, that counts for a heck of a lot. The clarity of your proposition and the values driving that proposition is probably the most important thing.
Well, it's a good segue to talk about federal politics. And what I want to do with today's episode is get your insights into the messages that we are currently seeing from Labor and Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, and also from the Coalition and Peter Dutton, and what they and if there is a lack of message right now by any of them, then what would you expect, or what should we see from them going into the actual election? And so I thought we could break it up by starting with Labor and the Prime Minister, starting with its positive frame. What is Labor saying about itself in terms of its positive message to the electorate? And David Feeney, those that listens to the show regularly, David and I sort of speculated at the start of this year saying we're not completely clear of what exactly is our positive message that we are taking to the electorate. And, there's going to be an election come, early May. And even now in this moment, I'm still trying to get a handle on what exactly is that message that they're trying to take to the electorate. I even got so lazy as to go into Chat GTP and say, hey, Chat GTP, what is the Albanese government's central message that they're taking to the community? And it wrote back to me, gee, Stephen, don't ask me for something I don't know the answer to. No, I didn't say that. But it kind of come up with things like tax cuts, the budget surplus, and constructing 1.2 million homes over 5 years. And it's just rip stuff from the internet, basically. But it's aggregating information as these IA platforms do. But, I mean, it goes to the point that, someone as engaged in politics as I am, if I can't work out what the hell we're trying to say, then it worries me that people are disengaged from politics and don't really give a shit about, their governments, but will have to make a decision when they walk into a polling booth in sometime in May this year. Will they be clear on exactly what we stand for? And I just want to get a sense from you, John. What do you think is the narrative of the frame that they are currently talking about? Or if not, what should they be talking about?
Well, first point is I don't know either, and I should know. And I shouldn't know because I'm interested in politics. I should know because everyone should know. The central message of a campaign should be pretty much something that people could, about 70% of people that occasionally listen to the news should be able to tell you. It should be really obvious and really writ large. Sometimes people might have some secret strategy where they're going to sort of launch their sort of proposition late or something. That's pretty crazy. The way I look at it often is I can pick where my opponents are at, and you should be able to pick them 6 months out if they're professional and you know what their core theme message is. I'm not really sure what ours is. I'd almost take that a step further, Stephen, and say this, that what are the values that Anthony Albanese believes in and has brought to the table as Prime Minister? I think that really is a question that's the question you want people to be able to know. I'm clear about the leader's values. Ideally, you share them, but in fact, that is secondary, I think, to actually knowing what they are. So that clear set of values that are, and in practice, right, people don't tune that much into politics. So they will become aware of your values and your proposition probably through some sort of controversy, right? You did something controversial that allowed people to see what sort of person you are. And I think in a way, I sort of paint this as both a sort of a governance compliment and a politics not such a compliment, is that I think Albo's been what everyone in Australia would want him to be. He's been a Prime Minister who has not been mucking around with politics and looking for a cheap shot and looking for a press release or something to grandstand on. He's been a guy focused on governing well, and I think he's done that. But, the price that's not actually what gets you elected, right? Because people can't see who the man is, what he believes in and cares about. And the government has done a lot of really good things, but they've almost deliberately avoided controversy around those and not wanted to have a fight around them. What would those controversies be? Look, I don't know. I don't mind often, actually. I just want to see something. But I would say that we just went through a cyclone that was about as south as they have ever been, that is certainly related to climate change. And Dutton is obviously a climate change denier. He doesn't even try that hard to pretend against it. There was a chance to get out there and say, just to put it in that frame, the Liberals would have gone feral on the idea, how dare you politicise this disaster? But instead, that disaster was well managed and sort of boring, and those of us not in the heat of it probably forget about it by next week. So climate's one. Look, Trump is another one. I think who are the good guys over there, the Canadian Liberals, we're pretty much going to lose. And I reckon they'll win now. Why? Because Trump has been bullying them, and Canadians didn't like that, and the Canadian leadership stood up and had a red-hot go. Now, that's not the best way to deal with Trump. The best way to deal with him is to suck up to him, lie to him, tell him he's a beautiful genius, and then might throw you some scraps. And that's probably what we've done. And that's, again, Albo acting in the best interests of the country and governing well. But what does he think about it? What does he believe about that bully that has been, including Canada, have to be close to two of the most loyal allies the United States have ever had, and he's pissing on us from a great height. Well, I mean, if Albo had come out swinging, and what could Dutton do? I mean, his mob are all, all the way with Trump, aren't they? So I don't know if they were the ones, but I just say there are many opportunities to showcase your values, and there was a couple sitting there in the last week's news that were missed. So, I guess either of them could have showcased, like the climate one, potentially showcases your interest in the future, our kids' future stuff, so some great values in there. And the Trump one is actually about sort of build it here. It's Trump's message to his audience. And Albo is doing good stuff like that. He is trying to make sure we get manufacturing booming in the country and bringing jobs onshore. It would have been a great opportunity to have a lot of controversy around that, talk about what he's going to do to counteract this unfair attack on us, and start to talk about a narrative in that direction. But I honestly don't mind too much what your positive is, as long as it's good lefty Labor values, and get on with it. And I think we can sell anything in that space, but we haven't got much to sell at the minute.
It's funny you talk about that. It's just another example of that wanting to avoid controversy was the stage 3 tax cuts. Everyone was screaming out for it, except for obviously the opposition and the media, because the media were almost goading Labor into making the announcement so they could say that you're a flip-flopper and that you go back on your word. So kind of framing them up like Keating was, tax cuts at LAW law kind of moment. And, the government didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it, even though actually economically it was a smart thing to do. And it actually was good politics because people would benefit from that. And they got dragged into it kicking and screaming for that reason, that they wanted to avoid the controversy. But to your point, John, that would have been great controversy, because it would have been and what we saw in the end was when they finally made the announcement, the Peter Dutton and the coalition agreed with it, because they also realized the politics were bad if they were to oppose them making that move on the stage 3 tax cuts. And I just find it, I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's a generational thing. Is it a hangover from the Rudd-Gillard era of federal politics in the way that they campaign, that they're scared to fuck up, and they're worried about the consequences if they fuck up? Whereas you look at someone like the leadership of, like, say, Daniel Andrews, whenever there's a controversy, he ran to it. He was like, yeah, get me in on that, because I'm not only going to fix that, I'm actually going to turn that controversy into a weapon against my opponents, and all of a sudden they're going to be suffering the consequences. Like, it was like he was playing 3D chess the whole time. Whereas I find the feds just lack that courage to understand what is smart politics. And also, to your point, to show what are your values. Because, I'm sick and tired of hearing about, like, just Albo going on and talking about what people call the log cabin story, which, someone who trains folks on public narrative really annoys me as well. But they think that just saying I grew up in public housing, therefore you understand my values. And to your point, I think where you're going, John, was, absolutely. There is an origin moment where we understand where you learn those values in particular moments that were taught to you by your parents or your teachers or your sporting coach or family or friends or whatever, but also how do you exhibit those values, say, through your actions? And we're not seeing those actions come out from Albanese or this government in these moments of challenge. And that's sort of something that I think concerns me going forward. And I think it's a bigger conversation that federal Labor needs to have, because I think it's been a problem for us as far back as when Kevin Rudd flipped on the climate change stuff. I think that this has been an Achilles heel for federal Labor, dating back to the first Rudd government.
Look, I honestly think this is a little bit of an age thing in some ways, right? Like, I'm in my mid-50s. When I was really starting to get interested and think about politics, was in the 80s. In 1980s, you had a very narrow story that got pitched to the public, and it was one that was absolutely vetted by the media of the day. And so if you were seen to be competent by a small group of journalists and other people that would be in your circle around Parliament and other places, then that ended up filtering through to public perception, because public didn't have too many ways of getting information to them. And in this day and age, we have wonderful ways as members of the public of not allowing any information to us. It wasn't that long ago, I remember thinking, how long had it been since I'd seen an ad on telly? Because I've now got Netflix and I don't need to watch any ads. So that I think it's always been true and it's always been important. And think about people like Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. These guys could get out there and showcase their values and they were controversial about it. I think it's always been a useful tool, always been the most useful tool, but I think you could get away with it in the past. I think if you were just competent and did your job well and the scorecard that was given to the public by a relatively narrow band of media outlets said that you were better than the other guy, then that would work. And I suppose for me, what's happened is you sit in 1,000 or so focus groups over that, or perhaps twice that many over the last 25 years, and you sort of realise that, no one's picking any of that up. And what happens at these electric moments capture people and they define who you are. And it's actually only a relatively small number of things that define you. And that's why this not only is notion of a singular message, but of a thematic values-based message, but sort of one idea that you use to propel it is ideal. And I suppose I think that style, and you've got to say it's good government, right? If we were to put it the other way, what's elbow cocked up? You couldn't think of anything. Maybe the odd little tiny little micro gaffe here or there or something that was mildly embarrassing, but really very stable, very competent, very thorough sort of a government. But, just not somebody driving the politics in a way that needs to be. And then, compare that to, Trump, for all of his being an imbecile, he's got an endless string of electric moments. And I think even ScoMo, I don't think he's very bright. I don't think he's sort of very obviously lying all the time, but you could sort of see his values. I don't think we shared them, and that was a bit of his undoing in the end. But I'd say similar, perhaps we're going to talk about Dutton in a minute, but I think with Dutton I probably do know his values, and I don't think they're very well regarded, but I think they're clearer than Albanese, or at least to the average viewing member of the public.
Well, that's a good segue into talking about the negative frame that Labor will have on our opponents. And before we do that, I want to share a reflection from a documentary that came out in 2006, and it was a great documentary, and I recommend folks to, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it, particularly from the key lessons around message consistency and framing up yourself and your opponent. It's on the documentary covers the 2004 US presidential election between the then President George W. Bush and the Democratic nominee John Kerry. The documentary is called So Goes the Nation, and it mostly focuses on the state of Ohio, but it is examining the two presidential campaigns. And the context going into that campaign, that 2004 presidential campaign, Bush's approval numbers were the lowest of any serving president at that time. I think Trump in the end beat that. The economy was tanking. Unemployment was skyrocketing. They were still in two unpopular wars. And so the scene was set for John Kerry to win, because based on past presidential elections, this is not great terrain for an incumbent to be returned to the White House. And what they came up with was George Bush was strong and safe because the threat of 9/11 was still ever present. There was still, there was a lot of things happening overseas, and folks were concerned about more terrorist attacks happening in the United States. And Bush was seen as like a father figure. He was strong and safe, and he had it on record by the way he conducted himself around September 11, versus someone who was weak and seen as a flip-flopper, which was John Kerry. And I just want to get a sense from you with that, John. Is there a balance there in which we can identify the strengths of Anthony Albanese versus the weaknesses of Peter Dutton? Like, how would you frame up Peter Dutton and the coalition going into this campaign?
Well, I think Dutton is a sort of nasty sort of a persona, and that's a sort of brand weakness for the coalition as well, that they would be so economically responsible as they would like to put it. But the other side of that is, well, what are they going to cut? So I don't know that necessarily means, cutting services because they're more delivered at a state level, but that notion of not caring and not being kind, and that people will be left behind and that workers will be done over. And he gave us that little gift of the free lunches for bosses that could sort of write off their boozy lunches now, and of course workers have to pay for their lunch. So I think that the bit that Dutton adds onto the standard Liberal National Party brand weaknesses is that believability that it would be cruel. He's got a hard, nasty sort of voice, persona, even sort of face, look and feel, and that muscular sort of thing can be quite good if you're, projecting certain things. That sort of, alpha male aggression thing that can suit certain types of propositions, but it's actually that's the space you're looking for as a weakness. And I don't think Albo's been a bullying sort of a guy. So although I think he's largely brandless, actually astonishingly brandless for a Prime Minister, really, and not completely brandless, but I'd say pretty brandless. But certainly because he's Labor and because he hasn't behaved in a nasty way, I think it's within our it's within your scope of your imagination. I think this is a bloke who'd care and protect the little guy. And I've got to say, one time recently I saw him that he actually was electric, got him in front of a whole lot of steel workers at Whyalla. If I was working for that fella, I would say, just get him in front of a friendly, union crowd if we can, because he was great talking about Australian jobs and looking after it. This is not expenditure, this is an investment in our future. He's fabulous in that context. So I think that notion of sort of Albo in the corner of the little guy and in the worker in particular, when we have sort of industrial relations elections, we win them, and industrial relations incredibly closely tied to the economy, but that sort of jobs, good quality jobs, well-paid jobs is our space in it, and theirs is all the, inflation-y, facty, figure-y, tax ratey sort of stuff that they want to bang on about. So I reckon I'd be getting into Dutton as he's going to leave you behind, and which he will, as they always do. So we've got truth to it. You've also got that brand credibility about it. So I'd be hunting around for those sorts of things to find to hammer him on. You talked about this as well. The thing about election campaigns is it's an ideas contest, and the two ideas interact, and they have a positive about them and a negative about us, and we have a positive about us and a negative about them, and those four themes interplay, and you often find you get someone either unexpectedly wins or wins by a big margin when one of those arguments sort of is valid, right? Because they all make sense in their own way, but one of them also sort of supports the other. So the Liberals might be driving home this really strong message about we'll, fix the budget, and our negative is they're going to cut, pensions and so on, or whatever it might be. And in that case, part of their positive is supporting part of our negative. And when you can get that happening, then you often get these surprisingly big results. Well, the polls were all wrong. Well, no, the campaign's played out.
It's an interesting point you make. I do recall you and I having a chat about this after, I think maybe it would have been the 2019 federal election campaign after Bill had lost against Morrison. And we were talking about why Labor didn't make a bigger deal about wage growth and raising the minimum wage and, investing in good paying Australian jobs. Because the contrast was the Liberals actually were kind of a bit bolshy, and they were running around talking that, we need to get on top of wages. We need to hold them down. And I just wonder if there's space in this campaign, to the point you were just saying before about really ramping that up. Do you remember that moment in the 2022 campaign when Albo was almost forced into saying that, like, he held up the dollar coin saying, if we increase the minimum wage, it's only going to cost an extra $1?
This is about whether those people on the minimum wage in Australia get $1. They talk about how strong the economy is, but a $1 increase for those people who are on the absolute minimum wage, somehow the sky will fall in.
It's very defensive.
Yeah, he was. Another example of, like, I don't want to walk into this controversy, and he kind of got cornered and was like, fuck it, all right, it's only going to cost this much, and everyone went, yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. That makes sense, and also good to see you're a fighter. I think people actually want their Prime Minister to actually stick up for working people. And that working people is a pretty big cohort of voters, mind you. And I just wonder if there's a sort of a frame there upon which we can be talking about in this cost of living crisis, where we can say, hey, the best thing that we can do to help address your home budget is to make sure that we put more money in your pocket. And if the Libs want to run and say that's inflationary, to your point, that all sounds economic-y, strange financial review chat, whereas people would go, no, I want more money in my pocket, because right now coffee's $7 and I'm getting 5 a day and 5 a week, and 5 a day I'd be fine, 5 a week, and that's starting to tally up a little bit. So actually that was it. I like what the Prime Minister's saying. I would like more money in my pocket.
I mean, the ideal situation, there's 3 states of being for a government or a politician, opposition included, I suppose. One is they hate you, one is they love you, and the other one is they don't really know much about you. And one of the things I have noticed when I talk to people in focus groups is, who is Albo? What does he believe in? What is he doing? I'm not really sure. But I think that they are absolutely still open to the idea that he might have been doing something good, and that he might believe in some good things, because he hasn't made a rat bag of himself. So I think that, if he can just get a couple of things to get his teeth into, and I think actually, when he does get fired up, he is capable of speaking with a bit of passion. He's probably one of those people who needs to do a bit less homework, and just go hard on something that he believes in. But look, maybe that's not something, not his style. He's a competent fella. So, maybe it's got to be a bit more sort of thought about. But, anything we can do, I mean, you talk about that dollar in the pocket. I don't mind that sort of stuff. I think that can lend itself toward the Libs being able to counter with a bigger tax cut or something. And, even if they've got a smaller one, it'll be believable. But certainly anything to do with your wages and, investing in Australians and supporting our public services. And, I mean, it's a very, very different country to the United States. I've done polls and said to people, what do you think about this idea? Like, electricity, it's all outside WA, it's all sort of privatised, and should we just sort of buy it all back and just the government runs the electricity system? Number 1, job, reliable power. Number 2, affordable. Number 3, get it to 100% clean as quick as we can. People go, that seems pretty sensible. Well, that's called nationalisation. It's regarded as a radical left-wing thing to do. I actually don't think there are any constraints on Australians' support for a pro-Australia sort of economic narrative that's about government taking control and doing stuff. So there's infinite opportunities there. He's just got to find one that he believes in. And again, as I heard him talking about, like that intervention at the Whyalla steel plant, that was by ordinary political convention beginning in the sort of Reagan-Thatcher era in the 80s. That was, you can't do that. No, let the market do that stuff. Well, we tried that with Telstra. Our bills went up. We tried that with power. Our bills went up. Bills went up, service went down. Bills went up, service went down. People are absolutely fine with the notion of a government intervention, and I thought he was great on that. So to me, there's some clues in there, and there's a great opportunity for us. Look, I suppose to be a bit broader about it, I'd say the only reason I think we're up against the wall, or the big reason we're up against the wall here, is cost of living's tough. Governments all around the world, even those that have been returned, have lost some skin. So, you want a big margin, and we haven't got it. So, we need to pull something out of the hat. You've got to make sure that, you've proven you've done some useful things, which we've got a bit of a gap on. We've done them, but haven't shown people them. And then the other one is can start to run some pretty effective negative on your opponent. The luck for us here is that we've got Dutton, and he's an ugly figure in Australian politics. And so, in a sense, I feel like we've fast forwarded. We're more like being at the end of a 2-term cycle than the end of a first-term cycle. I'd expect this campaign to be more negative for that reason on both sides.
I mean, so that leads me to my next question. I was going to ask you about actually what Dutton's positive frame is for themselves, but maybe we'll save that to the end. But Dutton's and the coalition's negative frame on Labor, I'm interested in getting your take on that, because Feeney and I talked about this a couple of shows ago. It's eerily his message consistency is eerily similar to Abbott in the lead up to the 2013 campaign. Daniel Andrews in the lead up to the 2014 campaign. Like, you can see him zeroing in on the four key things that he just wants to say about Labor. And it's centering, and I say he's zeroing in because I'm not sure if they've completely worked out exactly what they want to say, but I think they're playing around with some stuff. And it was, Labor's energy policy is a shambles. Labor's cost of living has got out of control, and Labor's continuing immigration and visa program is a shambles. I feel like they'll drop immigration. And I only say that just looking at a bunch of research published research has been coming out and looking at sort of the crosstabs on issue salience. Immigration actually is quite low down. Obviously, cost of living is just far and away so far ahead. It's not funny. But immigration doesn't seem to be as big a issue. So they're some of the things that you can notice that Dutton is saying about us. And to be fair, he is a metronome of negativity about us. And I'm just wondering about what you're hearing from the opposition, what concerns you about what they're saying about us or Labor.
Well, I mean, what's smart about what they're saying, I guess, is that they're really trying to just lever off cost of living stuff. That thing about energy shambles or whatever you've mentioned there, that's really just a way of them trying to bring in your power bill and trying to fake to Labor that they're happy to have a fight about climate. I think they've probably succeeded in scaring us off from that a bit. Any and all actions in favour of climate, including offshore wind, that is supposedly hated by, if you listen to the Murdoch media, is in fact all popular and good, and people want to see all of those things and see more of them. Even, I know overhead power lines are ugly and we're going to have a lot more of them, but so that is really just, we should be willing to get in that fight. He's just trying to push that fight away. And he's almost got in that as a preemptive segue when we say something about climate or renewable energy or something and the huge amount of jobs we can create in that space. He wants to be able to say, energy shambles, and all you need is a couple of power blackouts and it looks sort of true. So really, and then he's also wanting to link that back into the cost of living. And that has been one of the key factors. One of the all of our bills that have been going up, except everything's going up except our wages, is energy. So I think that's a smart thing. But they'll be pretty singularly focused on reminding people about cost of living. And I think people sort of get, most people probably sort of get that it's not really the government of the day's fault, but it does make you a bit shitty and you want something to change and to be done. And if you can't see the government being an instrument of prevention or protection in a cost of living sort of crisis or horrible circumstances, then, maybe they're part of the problem. And, maybe could we give someone else a go? And I think that is the smart bit about what they're doing, is just trying to focus there on the one thing people don't like and then sheet it all home to elbow. I think it's not being done that well. And, I think is that Dutton is such a narky sort of bloke and he's just got this such aggro about him that he just looks nasty and negative all the time about it. I'd probably take clarity of message and nastiness if he was my candidate. I'd say I could live with that package. That's going to sort of work. But I think that's where they're, I think, a bit undermining themselves in a sense, that they are coming across in such a way that is negative for the sake of negative often when, and as you know, I'm a big fan of negative campaigning because that's the way human brains work, right? We respond better to fears than we do opportunities. But so I think you've really got to have a very strong negative message. But the purpose of a negative message is to create a values disconnection between your opponent and the voting public. That is its purpose. Saying he's a horrible person as a prequel to your key point doesn't do that any better. In fact, it puts people's guard up at, more political claptrap. So, if Dutton could be making that point in a more sophisticated or even just more eloquent or pretty or example-laden sort of way, that would probably be better. But look, the bludgeoning of Albo as the architect of your household economic woes is a pretty good theme if I was assessing it politically.
It's funny you were talking about that negative frame. Do you remember when in the 2014 campaign in Victoria when we were crafting our scripts for our volunteers when they were knocking on the doors and making calls to undecided and targeted voters, our negative frame on the then Premier of the state, which was Liberal Premier Dennis Napthine, we the natural inclination is from a policy person or from a comms person is to overcook the negative, like he's a horrible person or, he's just, the devil incarnate or whatever. Whereas we found that what was more effective was to have our volunteers to say things like, I'd actually don't mind Dennis Napthine. He seems like a really nice guy and I think he cares a lot. I just don't think he's up to it right now. And I think things have just got a little bit out of control and he's kind of lost the plot on a couple of issues that are really, really important to all of us, like, skills funding and for our younger kids in terms of TAFE or, ambulance wait times, that kind of stuff. So it was like a soft negative, not going out there and saying he's a chicken fucker, And I'm just wondering, is Dutton overcooking the negative on us or has he got the tone right? Because you always talk to me, John, about getting the tone right, both in terms of your positive frame, but also what you're saying about your opponent.
I don't think he's got the tone right, but in this case, I could, you've got to work with the candidate you've got. So that's what he's good at. So, being nasty. So, hammering, that's okay. But it does dilute the effectiveness. Take it back to 2014. I wish I had a copy of this out. It's one of my favourites. So what we went out hunting for is where's the Liberal government weak? Well, there's two things. You're looking for something in health and education, right? Around labour strengths, and there was ambulances and TAFE. These were things that ambulances had some problems and TAFEs had been cut. So that was a couple of things we had. And then got this ad together. It was only a 15-second ad. You've only got 12 seconds. And it was the most effective. You very rarely use your leader in a negative because you don't want them saying something nasty. But Daniel was able to pull this off and he's straight up to the camera and I'm not going to waste time blaming the Liberals for gutting TAFE. And he was quite assertive about this, but also there was a sincerity about it. And then after that, all the images, like that was not even 2.5 seconds, all the images are with him and TAFE kids and little kids and he's up and smiling. And that other, 9.5 seconds for that ad was the positive policies. In fact, I think he might have said, I'm not going to waste time blaming the Liberals for gutting TAFE. Here's my positive plan to fix it. And so, that, when you're trying to think of that with your media buyer, like, is that a positive or a negative ad? So, it's actually both. It's great. And I kid you not, I had 10 focus groups in a row before in the 9.5 groups, everyone said, isn't it great that he's not being negative? It's hardly ever see that. Like, it's just great. And then one bloke at the end of the 10th group said, actually, I think that was a bit negative. That's actually really cunning. You get the prize. Remember, the point of the negative is to create a values disconnection. So what you want to do is say, this person is harming this group of people. This person is doing these bad things. You have to say they're a bad person. I did some stuff for the AEU, Public School Teachers Union, at the height of Malcolm Turnbull's powers. And said he spoke recently. When he's good, he's very, very good, Turnbull. And he was at the height of his powers at the time, well above what he was before he managed to just hang on, which I think was 2019, 2016. Anyway, and you couldn't get him. The only thing you had on him at the time was that he was a rich bastard, but he'd earned it himself. So does that mean he's out of touch? Well, he probably is, but maybe out of touch on a hanging offence. So that's all we had. So I don't know if we ever ran this ad, but it worked when we were putting it in testing. It was a woman talking about her daughter. She's looking at the camera and she's in the kitchen sort of thing, and she says, look, I quite like Malcolm Turnbull, and I honestly think if he understood the harm that his cuts to education had done to kids like my daughter, I think he'd probably change them. Because that's what they were lobbying for, just change your bad decision or change actually Abbott's bad decision. And what you did then is you went from, I believe that he's probably out of touch, but that's not a hanging offence, to, he's out of touchness means he doesn't understand that families that can't afford elite schools and tutors and their kids' literacy is falling a bit behind, they slip through the cracks. So his out of touchness now causes good people harm. Like a kid struggling with her reading when she's 7, like what's a more perfectly beautiful, innocent, good character that now this guy is causing harm to? So that's the purpose of your negative, is to create that sense that this person, not necessarily through malice, or I think we're going to use malice on Dutton because we've got heaps of evidence of it, but not necessarily through malice, is going to cause harm to ideally you or someone like you, or also someone you might be sympathetic to. So think about, for example, older people with no home who are on the aged pension. They're doing it tough. Actually, none of my loved ones are in that category. There's no one that I'm really close to in that category. But if you're picking on them, I'm pretty shitty with you about it. That's wrong. And so sometimes ideally it's this big group of people that sit in the middle. It doesn't even really have to be that. This character is going to do harm to these people, or he's doing harm to these people. Right, well, we probably need someone else. And so, I just feel like Dutton is this guy. It's just like fill in the blanks on, who he's going, which good Australians this guy is going to deliberately screw over. And you'd almost get the sense for the sport of it, because he's just like a complete asshole. So I think there's plenty to get stuck into him about. It's just a matter of finding those key things and driving them home.
I'm wondering if we could do a negative on Dutton in a way that is framed up as if, like, as a positive, like, Peter Dutton is going to be strong for big business because he's going to keep wage growth low. He's going to give tax breaks for the top 1%. He's going to, what are the things that most Australians are like going, I don't like that at all, but run it like a positive for the Liberal Party, but obviously written and authorised by P. Erickson, ALP Canberra, or whatever it may be, or maybe get a union to do it. I don't know. I'm actually not sure about the laws around that kind of stuff. But it's just an interesting take of reframing a negative as opposed to the traditional kind of negatives that we do see in Australian political campaigns, which is, let's be honest, it's an ad with the photos that have been made black and white. It's a black screen with yellow and white text and some kind of haunting music over the top. And it's just a negative pamphlet, basically. And I'm wondering if we'll see a bit more creativity from our ad people going into this campaign.
It absolutely can be done. I have showed people ads that said, I'm not sure if that is a really bad Liberal ad or a really good Labor ad. They can't quite tell. And I think in some ways that can be the most compelling. One I remember for Steve Brax's win against my age 99 was 2002 actually, for him to be returned, was the public didn't know what Steve had done, right? He'd been busily getting on with his job. And so the ad starts out with black screen, silence, white writing comes up on the screen. What has Steve Brax done? It was not even voiced over, that's all it was. And you're thinking, well, people didn't really know at the time. They just wanted to do this as an Albo ad, right? Like, people didn't know. And then it's in chalk, in a slightly unpleasant sort of sound. And then he promised 800 more police. And then a newspaper headline, 936 more police. And so on and on and on it went for 60 seconds.
The Brax government is undoing the damage.
It was just thumping, and the music goes from low to high. It was just loud, and the tempo went up, and by the end of it, he's done a million things. And so that is a pretty simple device. It's a pretty cheap ad to put together, but it was just this device that made you drawn in to watch this negative because you can't help it. And then it gave you something that you weren't expecting. And so, and I think a bit of a stock standard thing which is done is the sort of the ordinary people at home. And I think that they can be absolute crackers when they're done well. They can also be a bit cookie cutter as well. You might remember in 2007 we won a very big win, got rid of Howard, but in 2006 it was the ACTU that defeated him. And one of the things that happened in that ad was they had a woman being rung up and effectively being sacked. And she's a great actor, ordinary person looking, but, great actor. And she just looked really stressed. And they had her two little kids on the couch. And I kid you not, one of the little kids, she's a lovely little kid, she's an actor, but she's just a kid. And she thought that woman looked a bit sad, so she went up and leaned against her. Her mate just panned out. And her anxiety, the mum's anxiety around the cord of the telephone, because we used to speak on landlines still sometimes then, and the daughter leaning into her, it was just that. It was sort of simple in a way, right? It was just that ordinary people at home. But there was just some bit of magic about that. I think if you can and what was she talking about? Work choices. John Howard won in 2014, wins the Senate, gets control, right-wing dream 20 years ago, smashing our industrial relations system and screwing over every worker, and everyone could be unfairly dismissed and it wasn't a case anymore. That was a brutal, brutal attack on Howard, and he was finished from then. So, whatever Labor ran in 2007, yes, Kevin 07, what was it? It was just Kevin 07, yeah. That great message and great campaign was good, but all we had to do was just keep in front because he was dead by then. I'm not saying it was just that out, it was work choices more broadly, but a good values-based proposition, be it positive or negative, and a clever bit of creative. I think we're going to need both bits of those magic for this campaign. Otherwise, I'm feeling a bit nervous. We didn't have a big margin. We haven't got an immensely charismatic leader with a huge sort of personal following that we've had out of some of our state leaders. And this economic sort of, or household economic sort of cost of living problem, I don't like it. I also feel like Dutton, for all of his weaknesses, he's pretty focused on a singular message. And as a student of campaigns, I got to admire that. So I'm a bit nervous about this campaign. I know we've had some nice polls lately, but they haven't been good historically. It's not, like over the last couple of years, it's not a good situation.
John, I want to close it out with getting your reflections then on the positive. One thing we haven't talked about in this sort of 4-grid frame is the positive that is coming from Peter Dutton and the coalition, and I can't find any positive frames through my research and looking at what they've been saying in certainly in earned media over the last 3 or 4 months. He's talked a little bit about housing, but other than that, not much. And what I'm interested in getting your reflections on is, does he think that he doesn't need to come up with a positive plan to get into government? Because in my mind, 23 seats to win is a lot. And thinking about the seats that they are targeting, the word from the Liberal camp is they don't think they'll win all the seats that they lost to the Teals. The ones that they think they'll win back are the ones in which there is a Teal that is perceived to be Labor light. And that's people like, to give you folks examples, Zoe Daniel and Goldstein. So they think they can win those types of seats back, but also they think they can win seats in what would be traditional Labor heartland seats like Hawke in Melbourne's western suburbs. What I'm curious about, and I don't have the answer to this, but I'm curious about this. I'm thinking, well, there's a conflicting different sets of voters that you're trying to win over there. You're needing to win back women, particularly two types of women that are socially progressive but economically reasonably well off. And that would be in that kind of eastern suburbs of, Melbourne and Sydney kind of world, and Brisbane. But also you're trying to make this new pathway through Labor heartland in Hawke, which is younger families and migrants, or new migrant communities. And I'm just wondering, 23 seats is a lot to win. And I just can't see them winning 23 seats by just piling a bucket of shit on Albanese and Labor. I feel like there has to be some kind of offering for folks to not only not vote Labor, but then make the jump across to vote for a Liberal candidate. Because what we have seen, certainly as an example in the most recent Werribee by-election, a lot of folks turned away from Labor, but they didn't come to the Libs enough. And I'm wondering if my curiosity is that down to a lack of an positive offering from the Liberal candidate or the Liberal campaign?
That's a good question. I usually think that an opposition, I wish this wasn't true, but I think it is, an opposition doesn't really have to have much of a positive story. You've got to wreck the government and you've got to make them look bad and them look to be the problem. But the way that you want to do that is to make them be the problem in the way that your party and candidate are the natural solution. You're right about their overall strategy. There's always been the gender gap's bigger than it's been, and it's to the extent that Morrison had a very serious woman problem. Albo's got a slightly more serious man problem, as it turns out. So that gender gap's growing a bit in this country, not like the States, but it's growing. But still, age is the dominant thing. If you're over 65, you are overwhelmingly more likely to be conservative. If you're under 35, you're overwhelmingly more likely to be progressive. Like, it's a huge, big thing. But another one that's really jumps out these days is education, and that's why lesser education should mean, on average, lower incomes, and more education should mean higher incomes, and it means the inner suburbs, etc. So usually, historically, over the last 50 years, education would probably have pushed you in a more conservative direction. Now doesn't. It pushes the other way. So what we've had in successive elections around the country really is, and you've seen with the Teals, is that the other middle-class educated white people are peeling away from the Liberal Party, which looks really ugly when all it really believes on is picking on gay people and trans kids and brown people and stuff. And I mean, for all of the things that annoy me about the other middle-class white people in the inner city, they aren't racists or bigots. And so that doesn't really appeal to them in a values proposition, that they don't tend to peel off to Labor as much as they go to the Teals. Well, similar thing in the outer suburbs there. They can be, if you're lesser educated and you're further out of the city, sort of usually have less money, and then so you're being more screwed over by capitalism in effect, right? And particularly it's waxing and waning at the moment. So then you're more vulnerable. And of course, you are more susceptible to a 1 + 1 = Z. It must be the Muslims, or it must be some other group that's actually not related to this problem, which is what John Howard got them started on in trying to win back that battler. Whereas education teaches you to sort of look at things, and you sort of naturally, your brain just focuses on looking at things in a bit more detail, I think. Not criticising people for not looking at things in a more complicated way. It's up to us to get them a message that they can understand. But my point is that in the same way that the Libs can go away, Lib voters can peel off the Liberal Party in the inner city because there's a bit something yucky and nasty about the Liberal Party, but they'll go to the Teals, not Labor. Similar thing happens often with working class people in the outer suburbs and regions who they can go, I don't know if Labor's in my corner anymore either, but geez, Dutton ain't. So I think you might find Dutton would try to buy his way through that with some kind of big promise. But I suppose to get back to your question about do they need a positive, not really. If you do have a positive as an opposition, the purpose of that positive is to shine a light on what the government is not doing well. Its actual purpose isn't as much, to be honest, to get you to vote for that good thing. It's like, they're screwing you over on cost of living and we're going to cut your taxes. They're screwing you over on housing and we're going to increase the first home buyers grant or something. So it's not really that is going to make any difference. It's really that thing shines a light on that negative and allows your leader to flip in the last week or two, probably 3 these days with a lot of pre-polling, to actually having something positive to say. I think Dutton at his best can, if he practices, it can sort of sound a little bit positive or nice for a little while. He'll return to type under pressure, but, it's conceivable they'll be able to get him in some ads and get 43 takes and one of them he looks friendly and positive. Yeah, they might do that. But I think if you're asking about that gap, I think the reason they're going to have trouble converting those seats like Hawke, that I've just moved out of, is probably more that working people know that the Liberal Party ain't going to be on their side. And I don't know that Dutton is the guy that's going to convince them differently of that, but that's the Liberal Party's job. And look, the one thing I will say, and you've been a big part of this over the years, Stephen, is the Labor campaign machine, the actual mechanical machine, is by far the best in the country. No one's got anything on it. The Liberal Party certainly doesn't. The actual getting out there, knocking on doors, engaging people, talking to people, physically rolling out the arms and legs of energetic people who get out there and do our campaign. The Labor Party is just streets ahead of everybody in that space. If we can get a clear message and get going, I'm not pessimistic to the point of feeling that we can't or won't win. I just think, this is unfortunately one term in. This is a tough situation to be in. So I guess if people are out there thinking about getting involved, I'll get involved all right, because we're going to need to pull out the best game we can here, I think, to hang on.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, you said it yourself, and this has basically been the topic of this conversation. Those volunteers need something to talk about on the doors, and that's what we need to sort out now. You can have the best ground game in the world, but if what you've got to say on the doors isn't enough to shift the voters, then, it's not worth anything. So as our listeners know, when it comes to the federal campaign, we'll be doing our sort of weekly election recap for the federal campaign for 4 weeks leading up to the poll, whenever it may be called, and then obviously the week after. And we'll be calling on John to come in every now and then and give us his insights into what he's hearing from the campaigns throughout the election. So we're looking forward to seeing you again, John. John, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Finally got to talk about mega politics after our false start last time. Good to see you, and we look forward to having you back on the show when the election's called.
All right, good on you, Stephen. Thanks. We're really looking forward to that at my end too. Good on you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Socially Democratic. Like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser, and get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic by following us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. See you next Friday.